not about the markets, about something um, to do with the war that's happening right now in Israel and between the various groups it is dealing with on the other side, unfortunately. So I was having this discussion, and somebody was making the argument or just taking the point of view that Israel is the aggressor, because that's how popular culture that doesn't have any clue usually sees it. Israel is the aggressor in this war, and Israel has to stop fighting. And they say they're pro-Palestinian, and they blame everything on Israel. And they claim they want peace, but that means that Israel has to leave Hamas and Hezbollah alone. So let's start with the obvious facts. But it was the big current one, and it was Hamas that started it, together with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the United Nations Relief Works Agency, which, yes, took part directly in the attacks, and is, as far as I'm concerned, a terror organization, no different than the Hamas or the PIG and BIJ in that sense, because they were directly involved in attacks and brutal murders, kidnapping and keeping hostages in their homes, like literally in the homes of staffers of United Nations Relief Work Agency people. So let's not kid ourselves. Hezbollah also is the aggressor. They started, the current war with Israel, the current phase of the war with Israel, the very next day on October 8th, by shooting missiles into northern Israel, shooting mortars and rockets and drones and all these other things that they've consistently been shooting now every day for over a year now. And they have not stopped. In fact, as much as they've lost, whatever percentage of ability they had originally a year ago to shoot things at Israel, they've been using their remaining stockpile in increasing volumes in recent days and weeks, because they realize the Israeli army is taking out their assets, kicking their assets out of existence, pushing those forces above or north of the Litani River, which is where they're supposed to be, according to the UN Resolution 1701 that they signed on to as a signatory party, along with Israel. And only Hezbollah has never respected that UN resolution from the very day they signed it. And the United Nations Interim Forces in Lebanon, also known as UNIFIL, never enforced it and let Hezbollah run roughshod over them and literally build terrorist bases underneath UN bases, and allows Lebanese army to moonlight as Hezbollah people under their watch and train on Lebanese army bases where they also happen to have Hezbollah army bases. Oh, what a coincidence. So literally the United States is paying for Lebanese army bases where there are Hezbollah bases on those same bases. And they send American training officers to Lebanon to train Lebanese army soldiers and officers how to be better soldiers. And then many of those same soldiers turn around and literally are part of Hezbollah. And even the ones that aren't are training on the same basis. So they're literally observing Americans training them in how to be better soldiers to supposedly fight against Hezbollah. And anybody wonders why Hezbollah has relatively well-trained forces. It's not because Iran is training them, although they do. Right? It's because literally they're getting training from the Americans. So it's ridiculous. It's hypocritical. It's been going on for many years. It's not a Biden administration thing. It's not a Trump administration thing. It's been going on like this for many, many, many years. Okay? And it's a sad reality. But it is a reality. And what can happen if this war ends is there can be peace. What can happen between Israel and the Palestinians is there can be peace when this war ends. When the Palestinian terrorist organizations stop fighting, surrender, say, okay, we lose the war, we lost the war, we surrender, and they've released hostages. Then we can talk about peace, right? Until then, it's a non-starter. And most importantly, it's not just about them surrendering and releasing the hostages, because yes, those are two of the three elements, but the third very important element is the organization that is currently officially in charge of Gaza, which is the Hamas, cannot be allowed to return to power. They can't be allowed to stay in power. They need to be removed from power. Why? Because they're a terrorist organization. You can't let a terrorist organization run your nation if you want to have a nation. You can't let it run your fiefdom if you want that fiefdom to become a state. And yes, Gaza is a fiefdom. Gaza is a fiefdom, and so are the Palestinian-controlled areas of Judea and Samaria. Right? They operate on a very feudal system, like literally from like the Middle Ages kind of feudal system, where they have fiefdoms. That's why they're literally gangs of families that run these places. They don't have a cohesive nation of people because they're all from different places. They all have very different interests. When I say they're from different places, I mean there's especially people in Gaza. A lot of them are from Egypt. Many of them moved there after being in Israel for some time. If they came from Jordan or Syria or Lebanon or Saudi Arabia. Anyway, those are the majority of the countries that a lot of them came from. Some of them also came from Iraq, right? And they've been organized into little fiefdoms. That's how they've been running themselves. And so when you say you're pro-Palestinian or something, what you're really saying is you're anti-Israel. Because if you're actually pro-Palestinian, right, then you would be anti the terrorists. Ask any free-speaking Palestinian who's living in Gaza right now, and there aren't many, but there are some who have been speaking their mind openly in recent months since this crazy phase of the war began. Some who've lost a lot of their family members because of the war. They blame the Hamas. They don't blame Israel. Why is that? Because they see it for what it is. They see the Hamas starves them, doesn't let them have water, causes them to die because they steal their kids and make them fight and die, or they keep them as human shields when Israel's telling them, get out, get out, get out. And they're not allowed to even speak up and say, don't shoot, we're here. They're kept as hostages to the Hamas because Hamas wants them to die so that they can say, look, Israel killed more Palestinians, right? It's not like Israel doesn't make every effort to get them out. They do. They make more effort than any nation and army has ever made to keep civilians safe. Nevertheless, it's war, and you've got a terrorist organization like Hamas running the other side of it. So yeah, innocent people are going to die. It's terrible. It's disgusting. But yeah, if you're actually pro-Palestinian, like really Palestinian, pro-Palestinian, you actually want not genocidal bloodlust dreams of killing every Jew and Israeli and destroying all of Israel. If you actually want a real, peaceful, and prosperous Palestine to exist side by side with Israel, coexisting in peace, well, then you are pro-Israeli as well. And you are pro-Zionist, because that's exactly what Zionism has been advocating for ever since the reestablishment of the Jewish state, of the state of Israel in 1948. Israel offered the Palestinians, or the Arabs, they weren't called Palestinians then, they offered the Arabs peace and coexistence, and it was the Arabs who said no. And they said no every single time. And when they started calling themselves Palestinians, they rejected it again. And by the time the majority of them started calling themselves Palestinians, which was really not earlier than the 1970s, they kept rejecting it. So is it possible that there will be peace between Arabs and Israelis? between specifically Palestinian Arabs and Israelis? Yeah, absolutely, it's possible. It's kind of inevitable because we can't. It's just not going to. Conflict is going to last forever, and I know it feels like in many ways, well, this already has, but it hasn't. Right? There's plenty of wars that have lasted 100 years in the history of humanity. There's even a war called the 100 Years' War. Right? The War of the Roses. Anyway, so my point is, people who say that they are pro-Palestinian, unless they're actually pro-Israel, along with being pro-Palestinian, then they're not pro-Palestinian. They're just anti-Israel. Right? If you don't see that Hamas is the problem, if you justify and excuse Hamas's actions, remember, they are a terrorist organization. And if you are excusing a terrorist organization's actions, you're not pro-Palestinian. Because Israel is not just going to suddenly be like, oh, you know what? You're right. Let's just make pretend peace with these Palestinian terrorists. No. Israel wants to make peace with Palestinians who want to have peace. And Israel gave the Palestinian Arabs every chance to do it for decades. And for whatever reason, remains willing to do so. Right? That's the motivation of Israel, is to live in peace side by side with its neighbors, to live in peace and security and prosperity side by side with its neighbors, all of its neighbors. But is it going to happen? That ball is really in the court of the Arabs. They need to decide, specifically the ones who are calling themselves Palestinians. They need to decide, do they actually want to live in peace and prosperity? Or do they actually want to just have bloodlust, genocidal dreams that will never succeed? Because ultimately, nobody wants to say this at the official level, Israel has the Masada option. If you don't know what that is, point blank, Israel, in theory, allegedly, has the capability to, let's just say, put an end to whatever conflict is actually happening. Now, it would be really stupid if it tried to do that, because it would be essentially on its own land, or the fallout of such an event would be on its own land, quite literally. So it would be dumb. It would be the only reason you would do it is if you know you're going to lose your entire nation, and your nation is about to die anyway. So just do it, so that at least you don't go down without your enemy going down too. They have that same option with whatever other nation threatens it, right? And a faraway nation understands exactly what I mean, especially the ones who are funding the Hamas the most, like Iran, right? They know exactly what the Masada option is. If they don't, I highly recommend they Google it. So Israel isn't just going to disappear. I don't care what administration takes power in the United States. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the diplomatic relations are. Israel is not going to just disappear. There's a homeland for Israel. After nearly 2,000 years of not having been a homeland for the Jewish people, there is a homeland for the Jewish people. It's called Israel. It's their ancestral homeland. It's where Jews are from. What a shocker. And they managed to rebuild it and make a very strong and powerful little nation relative to its size, proportional to its size. So it's a matter of whether or not the Arabs actually want to have peace or not. If they want to have peace, then they have to be pro-Israel, just like Israel is pro-Palestinian, in the sense that Israel wants peace with the actual Palestinians that want peace, just like the Palestinians should want to have peace with the Israelis that want peace. Right? They should want to make the peace with them. I don't expect the reactionary, insane crackpots on either side to want to make peace with the other. Okay, but I don't compare as horrible and dangerous as they are. There is no comparing even the most right-wing crazy fanatics in Israel with the terrorists that run the Palestinians. Why? Because the crazy right-wing fanatics in Israel are not actually in charge of the Israeli government, and they don't actually set the policy, even if they're in government. even if they're in the cabinet, even if they have senior ministerial roles, they do not run the actual Israeli government and actual Israeli policy. And every time they do something outrageous, somebody blocks them. For example, they recently proposed to do something like annex Judea and Samaria, just out of hat, which would cause probably very significant problems with the State Department and the United States administration, even with Trump coming into power. Okay. Now, could they, in theory, annex the parts of Judea and Samaria that Israel controls and is likely to remain in control of? Yes, they could. Are they likely to annex all of Judea and Samaria, including the areas where there are millions of Palestinians living? No. Okay. Even if the crazy right-wingers were in charge, that is not likely to happen. Okay, because they don't want to cause massive harm to the long-term Israel, to the long-term interests of Israel. Some of them might not care. They're far and few in between, but they do not represent, nor do they lead any actual significant faction that actually runs the government. So, and on the Palestinian side, unfortunately, it's not the same. The bad guys run the place. Right? The foxes are running the henhouse. It's the worst situation it can be. You've got the Palestinian terrorists running the Palestinian people, claiming that their national aspiration is the destruction of Israel. If your national aspiration is the destruction of another nation, and it's not like your national aspiration is that because of an actual genocide you're fighting against. No, that's their aspiration because they can't accept that there's a Jewish state. They got 57 Muslim states, billions of Muslims around the world, a massive amount of land in the Middle East and North Africa and in Persia and in the Far East. And that's not enough. They got to have the tiny little sliver of land that's Israel. Why? Because they're psycho. That's why. Because Islamo-fascists are psycho, and other extreme Islamists or even non-religious Muslims, like theoretically the Fatah and the PLO and the Palestinian Authority, that are in theory not run by religion, they also have insane ideology. Their insane ideology was given to them by the Soviet Union. The communists said to them, Israel is a thorn is a problem. And the longer you attack Israel, the better it is for us. And the Russian dictatorship that followed after the Soviet Union fell remains the same. Under Boris Yeltsin, it was the same. Under Vladimir Putin, it remains the same. Right? They view Israel as a cudgel to keep attacking the West. The longer the Arabs are fighting against Israel, Russia gets to be this pretend diplomatic high-level influencer, and they get to keep bases in Syria and Lebanon, and they get to do all kinds of things in the Middle East that otherwise they probably wouldn't be able to do. So Russia's a bad actor here, just like Iran. Not quite as bad, but they're bad. They are happy to see this conflict continue because it makes them look less bad, despite all the horrible things they're doing in Ukraine. So, again, is Israel ever going to have peace with its neighbors, like the Palestinians and the Lebanese? Probably. When is that going to happen? When the Palestinians admit defeat in war, which they can do, because every other nation in the history of war that's ever in the history of the world that's lost a war has done that to end the war. Once they admit defeat, they accept that they lost. They see that Israel isn't just going to annihilate them, because if it wanted to, it would have already done that over the past 76 years. Then there can be peace. Once they accept peace and not keeping up their disgusting dreams of genocide. Once they put aside all that terrorism, there could be peace.
It's really quite simple. Once they free the hostages and get rid of their terrorists from the top, there can be peace. Until that happens, there's no discussion. Unfortunately, it's a waste of time. They need to decide when the pain is enough to give up their fight. Until then, Israel has to keep defending itself until these crackpots, until these dangerous terrorists in Gaza, in Judea, and Samaria, and also the ones who were crazy enough to keep fighting on behalf of Iran's requests in Lebanon, namely the Hezbollah, and in Yemen, namely the Houthis, and in Syria, and in Iraq, right, and wherever else these crazy people who just hate Jews and hate the fact that Jews have a country, right? Until they stop doing that Jew-hating stuff, Israel doesn't have a choice. What do you expect it to do? We're being attacked. Do you think we're not going to defend ourselves? Okay, well, we are. So that's it. I hope for peace immediately, every day. I wish it would happen immediately. And I wish these psychopaths would give up their disgusting evil dreams and allow the people that they currently oppress actually have the freedom to choose to live in peace and prosperity and security side by side in the world with Israel. And that's it for now, folks. Shalom.